All right. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much. On the 24th of June of the year 1812, Napoleon Bonaparte led his French forces into Russia, ostensibly to protect Poland. There might have been some other things going on there, some other political decisions. Napoleon probably believed he would just sort of march his way into Moscow and his demands would be met. He underestimated a couple of things. First was the Russians. They started engaging in scorched earth tactics, and they would burn their own cities to the ground before the French troops arrived so that they couldn't get access to the resources they needed. They had brought a force of close to 700,000 soldiers with them, which it's believed to be the largest army assembled up to that point in wartime history. And you can imagine trying to feed 700,000 people with cities burning to the ground would be very difficult. The other thing that Napoleon underestimated was the Russian winter. So by the time they got into Moscow, they had lost quite a few forces due to some of the skirmishes and the battles they'd gotten in. They had won most, if not all, the battles, but they weren't really making progress in getting where they needed to get. And by the time the Russian winter hit, between that and these battles, they lost over 500,000 soldiers. And by December of 1812, the last of the French troops were escaping Russia with their lives, barely making it out. For some people in this room, pornography is that woefully underestimated foe. People are going into battle with maybe just a high sense of optimism and hope, and that's about as far as they've gotten with things, only to find themselves decimated over and over again. Today I want to share with you 7 proven principles over the course of 7 days, and we're going to use stories of individuals to show you how these principles work. Okay? So that's our plan, and that's where we're going to go. The first thing that we're going to talk about, the very first principle, is called social awareness. Right? Now, for years, I have been speaking about self-awareness as one of the key components of recovery when it comes to pornography addiction or a compulsive pornography habit. One of the things that we've learned as therapists over the years is that people who struggle with addictions in general have a really, really hard time coping with emotional distress. And I'm going to talk more about why that is later in the presentation. But we know that emotions are wonderful early warning signs of relapse back into addiction. Because the distress tolerance for emotion is so low, when an individual feels high levels of emotional distress, it's only a matter of time before that distress becomes so overwhelming that they're going to turn back to their drug of choice, in this case pornography, to try to cope. Now, as important as self-awareness is, and I'll say this other component here first before I move on, as our therapy clients, for example, begin to become more self-aware and they're able to recognize emotion, articulate it, and then share it with another person, they often begin to find that their relapse frequency starts to decrease because they catch the early warning signs. They go, oh, I'm sad. And sadness is a trigger point for me because I don't know how to deal with it. And part of the presentation today, I'm going to talk to you about some of the ways that people have learned to cope with this emotional distress in order to keep themselves from falling back into pornography. But the other thing that I have come to learn is maybe just as important as self-awareness in recovery from addiction is social awareness. So social awareness is essentially me in relation to everyone around me. So how do you impact me, my emotions, my thoughts, etc., and what's my influence on you? It's that conscious awareness of me with everybody else. Okay? And one of the things we notice about people who struggle with addictions in general is they can often become quite egocentric, meaning they're focused on their own experience, their own pain. In fact, their own pain is so overwhelming, they have a hard time seeing what's going on with other people around them. Now, if you look at the research on social awareness as it's taught in schools, so they'll actually have these programs across the U.S. where they teach social awareness to children in public schools. Here are some of the outcomes that we find. Kids have better academic performance. So just by being socially aware, me in relation to everyone else, they actually perform better in testing and et cetera, homework assignments, things like that. That's a really interesting outcome. They have improved behavior, as you can imagine. They manage their stress better, and they actually have improved attitudes while at school. So social awareness is a big deal. When it relates to pornography addiction, and I'm going to say the term addiction, but we could go on and on about, what is an addiction, and is addiction even real, and that kind of stuff. To me, it's a word that we can quickly use to describe a person who is compulsively using pornography, wants to stop and can't, and is starting to experience consequences. So we'll just use the word addiction, but I know it's a very nuanced topic. So a couple of benefits of social awareness when it comes to pornography addiction. The first one is that you can actually learn from other people who have been down the path before, right? You can, and this is why I send my clients to 12-step addiction recovery meetings, because they can sit in a circle with 20 other people who've already been there. They know exactly what this person's thinking. They know exactly what they're experiencing. And they can say, oh, you know what, I've been where you are. Here's what I learned, and this has helped me a lot. So that social awareness of paying attention to other people around you can make a huge difference in learning lessons, maybe not quite the hard way, slightly less than the hard way, the medium way. Okay. The other thing is that when you are aware of your impact on other people, you can actually begin to develop empathy. This is particularly important when you have someone whose pornography use is going beyond pornography use, but it's going into lies and hiding and manipulating and saying that, oh, you're the reason I'm doing this, right? Blaming other people, those types of things. When a person becomes aware of the fact that being in a relationship with them actually might be painful, that can help create some motivation for change. So social awareness is extremely important. Now we're going to go to day one here. Here we are on day one of the 7 days sober. So each day we'll host a hero of the day. It's an individual who struggles to some degree or another with pornography. And we're going to talk about how they put this principle into practice to stay sober for today. Okay? So our hero today is a 17-year-old girl, right? So she's in high school. Isolation is one of the biggest challenges for her. She really struggles with social isolation. She has friends, but she's definitely a little bit more disconnected. And it's a Friday night. And she's alone at home. Her parents are home, but alone meaning she's not with her peers. She knows she's got peers out having fun together, activities and whatnot. She is alone in her room, and she's really feeling that isolation hitting her. Now remember, emotional distress, right? Emotional distress is a key predictor of relapse. So she pulls out her cell phone. Now her normal pattern of acting out is that she'll use her cell phone to sort of skim social media, to imagine what it would be like to be invited to all of these fun things that people are doing. And that starts to escalate, and eventually, sometimes she'll find herself looking at pornography. Okay? Today, because she's practicing social awareness, she's recently found a website that shares what are called daily recovery meditations. So, and there are books and websites dedicated to these things. It's a statement, a writing, a saying written by somebody who's in recovery from an addiction that is meant to be helpful and uplifting and help people feel connected to others. So she opens up her phone and actually reads these words right here. Some of us have felt so alienated that we've forgotten we're not alone. We've come to believe that we have to do it ourselves. Some of us have even been abandoned. Some of us have gone without love. Some of us have gotten used to people never being there for us. Some of us have struggled, had hard lessons to learn. We aren't alone, and we don't have to do it ourselves. We're not doing it ourselves. There is no shortage of love. Not anymore. And she understands the context of that all the people in recovery are supporting and helping each other as they find each other. And that really shifts her perspective. She forgets that she's just, she thinks, oh, I'm alone, I'm in my room, nobody cares, but then she remembers, no, that's not true at all. In fact, she remembers, my mom has a history when she grew up of really struggling with isolation. Maybe she would be someone I could actually talk to and get a feel for how to cope with this. She also remembers that she's got some cousins that love to FaceTime with her, and so she decides, you know what, I'm going to go down that path. I'm going to make some connections with some people I care about. I'm going to remind myself I'm not alone. And for today, she stays sober. Now this leads us, of course, to the next principle, which is to reach out. Now reaching out in recovery can mean, basically two basic things. The first one is avoiding isolation, actually having an emotional connection with another human being. And I'll regularly say that isolation is one of the biggest, strongest sort of killers of a person's recovery. It also means asking for help when you realize, I'm not going to be able to do this on my own. One of the, I think, interesting experiences that people have when they attend a 12-step meeting for the first time is rather than hearing a bunch of people saying, I figured it out, I know how to do this on my own now, they hear people saying, when I finally came to realize I was never going to do this on my own and I needed other people and I needed a higher power, suddenly things started to get better, right? And that's a unique experience because most people, when they think about pornography, they think, well, I just need to try harder, I need to do better, I need to figure out all the tools, right? And it's a completely different experience when they're learning that surrendering control over this and asking for help is how things get done. Reaching out works for recovery for many reasons, but let me tell you one of them that I think is pretty interesting. Researchers have discovered a principle that they call the watching eyes phenomenon. Okay? And the watching eyes phenomenon says that when we are aware that we are being watched, our behavior is being observed, the behavior changes. Okay? It's probably the reason that when you go into stores, they have the video monitor that shows you walking in, right? If I go to Home Depot, sometimes right at eye level in the aisles, probably where the most stuff is stolen, is a thing with a flashing red sign that says, you are being recorded. And the reason for that is because human beings, most human beings, intuitively have the sense that if I'm being watched, I have to behave differently. And they found that people engage in more pro-social and less anti-social behavior when they know they're being watched. So, in fact, it's probably the same reason that somebody wrote the lyrics to a Christmas song. Let's see, you'll remember this. He sees you when you're sleeping. He knows when you're awake. Creepy Santa Claus, right? Santa stalker. It's that idea that maybe kids will behave a little better if they know that the guy who's handing out the toys at the end of the year is paying attention to everything they're doing. He's watching you sleep like Edward from Twilight. So, that was not in my notes. So, in fact, even for those of you who are scientifically minded, even at a subatomic level, scientists have found that when they observe electrons directly, they actually behave differently than when they're not being observed. That's electrons, people. It's really, really fascinating. So, here we are on day 2. Our hero today is a married man. He's struggled with pornography since he was a teenager, and he is major conflict avoidant. He does not like it when people are upset at him. He has a really hard time dealing with conflict in his relationship. For that and many other reasons, he's chosen for the first part of his marriage to hide his pornography use because he was afraid that his wife was going to be upset at him and he'd get into conflict with her. But as he's been getting into recovery, he's realized, you know what? Being honest about things changes my behavior, so I'm going to start doing that. So, we're going to see how he puts watching eyes phenomenon into effect as he reaches out. Today, in the very first part of his day, he reaches out to his 12-step sponsor, somebody who's helping him down the path of the steps. So he has a quick phone call and says, hey, here's how my day is going to go, and is it okay if I check in with you a few times throughout the day so that I can stay connected, and I'll be accountable for how I'm managing my time and for whether I've been sexually triggered and what I've done about it. He's also, with his wife's permission, said, is it okay if I call you if I'm feeling emotionally distressed, if I'm having a hard time? Can I share those with you and get some emotional support? And she's absolutely willing to do that. Okay? Because his life, his behaviors are now semi-public, because he's going to be regularly accountable throughout the day, not just at the end of the day. And people do this all the time. They'll say, okay, at the end of the day, I want you to report in whether you looked at pornography or didn't. Okay? That's not a very useful methodology for accountability, because it doesn't really help you shift gears throughout the day. It is better to have several checkpoints throughout the day. That's not just about, did you look at pornography? Okay? Because remember, on a lot of levels, pornography is a symptom. Pornography use is a symptom of greater underlying issues, like low tolerance for distress. So a better measure is, how are you coping with your emotional distress today? Right? Or how are you keeping yourself healthy in other ways? Like, are you maintaining a healthy body today? Did you get enough sleep? Are you taking care of yourself, basically? Okay? And if you have multiple checkpoints throughout the day, that can facilitate this watching eyes phenomenon. And in this case, our hero stays sober for today, at least in part due to the watching eyes phenomenon. Now, I want you to notice something extremely important. Each of our heroes is only taking it a day at a time. They're not worrying about, how am I going to do this for the next 50 years? Okay? And I see people getting really overwhelmed by that regularly. You know, maybe they'll make it 30 days and it felt like a huge uphill battle, and they go, that's a month. I'm never going to make it. Now, as a side note, one of the things I find really interesting is when people, prior to people getting into real recovery and taking it seriously, they often overestimate how sexually sober they are. They'll say, oh, you know, sometimes I'll go months on end without looking at pornography, and then I'll do it a little bit, and then I'll go another 6 months. And then they start actually tracking their sobriety, and they're like, so apparently, in my mind, a week and a half is 6 months. I see this all of the time. You know, as soon as they start paying attention to that frequency, they realize, wow, I've been deluding myself, okay? And that leads us into day 3, which is question your stories. A sad, sad hallmark of pretty much all addictions is denial. And denial at its core is essentially permission-giving storytelling, okay? Our brains are actually wired to pay attention to stories. That's why we love stories, right? Whether it's a book or a play or a movie. In fact, if you're sitting in a room and Grandpa's there and he says, you know, when I was a kid, everyone's like, hold on, it's a story. You know, you get excited because our brains are wired to pay attention to story. And when you tell convincing stories about how your behaviors are okay, it really shifts the way that you think about things, okay? And denial is really all about keeping yourself as far away from reality as possible, because if your behaviors are here and your values are over here, you know, it's not long before people go crazy. So to bridge the gap between values and behaviors are these denial stories. Here's some examples of denial stories that you might think of or you might hear in relation to pornography use. This won't hurt anyone, right? I'm not hurting anybody. Or, you know what, I don't like the way I'm being treated. I can do whatever I want. People are being mean to me, so why do I have to care about what they say? I hear that one a lot. When I look at pornography and I'm honest with people, they get really upset. So I'm clearly hurting people with telling them. So lying to people is helping people. And I hear that quite frequently too. Now, it's not usually articulated like that. It's usually in a little more subtle way. Like, you know, I'm not the kind of person that hurts people, and I don't want to hurt people. I'd rather take this on myself. It's almost like I'm self-sacrificing on behalf of people I care about. But the reality is that that's not true. Okay? Denial keeps people stuck. When you're in denial, it's like having half of a brain. And the real problem with denial is no one's ever aware that they're in denial, because then it wouldn't be denial. You know, nobody's like, oh, I've got to really amp up my denial game today so that I can get through the day. Nobody ever thinks about that kind of stuff. So confronting somebody who's in denial is, in my opinion, one of the most challenging things that you have to do in this early recovery process. Okay? But for you, if you are the person who's struggling, my recommendation is that you need to say to yourself, there's a pretty good chance that I'm in denial, because that's what people do. Even if I think my stories are fully legit, even if I can logically talk my way into or out of any conversation, there's a good chance that I'm not really thinking very carefully through things, or that I've concocted believable stories about my behavior that make it okay, but really it's not okay. So that's part of what questioning your stories is assuming that your assumptions are wrong. Okay? The other one is actually being able to accept feedback from others so that you make better decisions. Okay? As a therapist, when I'm early in recovery with somebody and I'm helping them through this part, this is where a lot of the stuckness will happen, because they're coming in with very convincing stories, and it's extremely difficult to get a person to accept that they're in denial, because in fact, the harder you try to convince a person that they're in denial, the more likely they will be to dig into the story. Okay? We have defense mechanisms in our brain that are designed to keep us sane. And if you have to start doing reality testing, like maybe everything I believe about the universe is wrong, people don't tend to like doing that, and that's really tough. It takes an incredible amount of humility for a person to say, maybe my assumptions are wrong. Okay? Now, here's how you can do it. If you're in a place where you're not able yet to even question your own stories, what you need to do is be able to borrow other people's brains. And all these tie together, because when you reach out, right, and you're socially aware, you're capable of borrowing another person's brain. So let's give an example today. We're in day 3. Our hero today is a teenage boy. He was exposed a number of months back to pornography, accidentally. He's mostly avoided it since then, but he definitely can feel the pull. It's drawing him back in. Now, fortunately for him, his parents came to this conference and learned about denial. And so they sat down with him when they found out. And they asked him, they said, what stories were you telling yourself just before or while you were looking at the pornography? How did you make it okay for yourself? Okay? And they went through that process. And they said, the next time you feel that pull, I want you to make sure that in your mind, at least, you can say, these are the stories I'm telling myself. Now, we have a particularly woke teenager in this story. He's going to do a very good job of managing this. So he's feeling that pull to look at pornography, and he says to himself, okay, what stories am I telling myself right now? So here they are. I'm only going to look for a second. This one's my favorite. I'm just checking to see if the internet filter is still working. I'm on an assignment from my parents to just test it out, testing the electric fences and making sure they're okay. Okay, and it's harmless. I'm not, nobody's getting hurt here, kind of thing. Now, because of the talk he's had with his mom and dad, okay, and this is an association in the brain. The last time he looked at pornography, his mom and dad had this conversation, so his brain's already ready to associate the dialogue with mom and dad with the next time he's wanting to look. He sits there and he says, you know what, I'm going to be honest with myself. 1 second's going to be an hour. Mom and dad didn't ask me to check the filter. There are probably less problematic ways of testing the filter than this. And also, if I'm sneaking testing the filter, it's probably not right, right? And you know what? Maybe I'm actually not aware of the harms I might be causing to myself or others. He realizes that because he's in this state of mind that he's going to need some more help, he talks to mom and dad. Now again, maybe this is an unreasonably self-aware teenager, right? Remember, the prefrontal cortex, the decision-making center of the brain, isn't fully cooked until mid to late 20s. So it becomes very difficult for teens to make these type of rational decisions. It's not their fault. It's just the way they're wired. But as parents, that shouldn't stop us from educating them and trying to help them anyway. Isn't parenting mostly teaching morals, principles, and values and waiting for 25 years for them to kick in anyway? All right? Sometimes you have to have your own kids before you're like, wait a minute, mom and dad weren't the worst parents in the world. They were pretty good, actually, as it turns out. A lot of apologies in the mid-30s to parents happening. Some of you are still waiting for those apologies. They might be happening behind the scenes. They just don't want to tell you because they don't want to hear I told you so. So, Speaking of borrowing people's brains, let's go to our next principle. Live conscientiously. I find this one really interesting. Between every year that I speak, whether here or at other places, I'm always looking into the research and trying to find new things that explain what makes human beings tick, why we do what we do, and how to get people to change. One of my therapists regularly says that therapy is about helping people figure out why they can't seem to do what they know that they need to do. Right? And that's a pretty good definition of therapy. Social scientists generally agree that among the sort of core traits that make up an individual human being, conscientiousness is one of them. So let me define conscientiousness for you. It's essentially three things: how organized you are, how disciplined you are when you're going after a task, and how detail-oriented you are. Some of you are like, well, I'm the literal opposite of that explanation, right? That definition. So conscientiousness as a character trait is really interesting. It's been linked to success in work and school, as you can imagine. It's been linked to well-being, a sense of satisfaction with life. It's also one of the strongest predictors of longevity, so how long you live. That's probably because highly conscientious people don't base jump off of buildings, and if they do, they quadruple check the parachute first. Okay? So my clinical experience says that conscientiousness is a very important and strong indicator of lasting recovery. And here's why. Because you're paying close attention to patterns. You're looking for predictors of what might put you in danger of relapse. You're always on the lookout. Okay? You're vigilant when you're conscientious. You organize your day around behaviors that are healthy and keep you safe. Low conscientiousness would lead to people kind of going, here I am today, I wonder what's going to happen, right? And that may be an exciting way to live for some people, but it's certainly at a high cost if you're looking at a recovery from an addiction. And finally, you relentlessly and in a disciplined way go after things that you want. So I'm going to show you what this would look like on day number 4 here, and then we're going to talk about what happens if that's not your personality. What do you do about it? So today our hero is another married man. He's been sober for about 5 months from pornography, so he's doing all right. But every couple of weeks he starts feeling triggered again, and he's worried that he's going to fall back into it. So today he's going to live conscientiously. He wakes up 20 minutes early on purpose today so he can read in the White Book of Sexaholics Anonymous. That's a book that he finds very helpful. It's written by other recovering addicts. It's part of the literature of his 12-step group. So he reads in that and he feels connected to other people in recovery, and that's really important for him. He makes decisions with his wife about how he's going to manage his day. So he doesn't just go, I'm just going to wing it and see what happens. He has dialogues with her throughout the day. Here's what's going on. I've got some free time. And what's the best way to manage this? This is a conscientious way of life. But also notice he's borrowing her brain a little bit, which kind of hints at where we're going to go here. He organizes his day around some of the key behaviors that he knows will help him stay healthy. So making sure he gets some exercise in, making sure he has time to connect with other people. One of the things that he knows is really important is that being alone for him is too risky for his recovery right now. He hopes that in the long run he'll be able to, like everybody else on the planet, spend some time alone and not be crashing back into pornography. But for now, he's smart enough to know that that's just not where he is. So because of that awareness, on his way home from work, he gives his wife a quick call, and he double checks to make sure that people are going to be home before he gets there. So he's thinking ahead in a very conscientious way. And if she had said, no, actually no one's home, he would have made a decision to do something different until people had gotten home. And because of this conscientiousness, he stays sober just for today. Now, what happens if you're not highly conscientious, right? That's just not who you are. You're more of a free spirit. You don't like thinking ahead that much. You just want to be a little bit unpredictable, and that's okay. There isn't anything wrong with that. You're more likely to die sooner than the rest of us. But that's okay because you'll probably have more fun than the rest of us while you're alive, okay? So it probably balances out in the end. You can practice conscientiousness. So this would be things like setting a bunch of alarms in your phone to remind yourself to do different things. Now, some of you do that, and you get the alarm and you go, oh yeah, that's something I'm supposed to do. Snooze. Okay? That's how you also, stay in bed an extra hour every morning, right? Why do you set your alarm at 7 when you know you're going to get up at 8? Like, just come on. Just put it at 8. Let's just make the commitment right now. Okay? So you might do that. You might set some alarms. If you're going to do that, you're going to want to actually put some rewards together. And I actually do this. So I'm not much of a behavioral therapist, but I've noticed that sometimes with some clients, therapy clients, that behaviorism is actually pretty helpful. So I'll say, all right, we're going to set some micro rewards for you. As long as you are proactively going after, it's called a promotion mindset. If you're going after certain tasks, give yourself little rewards to be able to say, oh, this is still a good idea. I want to keep doing this. If you don't follow through with conscientious behaviors, if you're not very careful and cautious, if you overlook things, put together some little consequences or little micro punishments, okay? That's a very behaviorist way of doing things. I've found for some people it actually works really, really well. So if you're one of those people, try it out. See how it works. But the truth is, it's actually really hard to change personality. There isn't a lot of evidence in the research that says you can actually alter a human being's basic core personality. So if that's the case, and you're not a very highly conscientious person, then guess what? You need to borrow someone else's brain. So in the best case, marry someone who's highly conscientious, okay? Give them some kind of personality test on the first date. If they score high in that area, they're still in, okay? If that doesn't work out for you, that's okay, because that's what a recovery mentor would be, or a 12-step sponsor. Surround yourself with highly conscientious people, and then triple check with them your plans, your ideas, what you're thinking about doing, okay? One of the reasons that my wife and I have had such a successful run so far in our business that we're doing is that we have characteristics that balance each other out. Sometimes I have a wild idea and I want to run with it, and I'll run it past her, and she'll say, that's the craziest thing I've ever heard. We're not doing that. And I go, never mind. Okay? And there are times in which she says, I really want to do this, and I'll say, that seems like not the best use of our resources. We need to scale back. And we do it anyway because she's always right. But that... And I mean that not as a joke. I've learned that actually over the years. My wife somehow is always right about everything. And so I have to swallow my pride regularly on different things and go, okay, it seemed like a good idea in my brain, but we're going to roll with what you say, because so far my life's turning out better than it would have without you. So, and by the way, a lot of my guys that I work with will end up saying things like that, and their wives are currently nudging them right now. Listen to what he's saying, man. Get off Bejeweled on your phone, okay? A lot of guys will say to me, gosh, I didn't realize it. My wife's a genius. All these years I've been saying she's crazy. She's amazing, right? That's a common outcome I see for married guys in recovery. So just giving you an FYI for your future. All right. Now, here's the other thing. No, there is no other thing. Hold on. Where am I? I'm lost, you guys. I hope you're catching my drift here that people don't recover on their own, almost ever. Okay? As human beings, we are not meant to do things on our own. We are meant to do things in community. If you haven't figured that out by now, I'm trying to give you a hint here so you can get that figured out. The longer you spend your time trying to figure things out on your own, the more time you're going to waste. Okay? This is going to move us on now to the one I was supposed to do. Oh, that's so interesting. Yeah, there we go. Over-communicate. I want to talk about how communication works in recovery and what works versus what doesn't work. Okay? So if social awareness is important, if reaching out is important, if getting support is important, then one of the worst things you can do, one of the biggest mistakes you can make is underrepresenting or under-communicating what is going on internally with you. No one can help you if they don't know that you actually need help. Okay? And I've found that invariably with my therapy clients, the ones who are regularly acting out with pornography and not really getting better are the ones who are not regularly opening up about what's actually happening with them. They're under-communicating. Now, if over-communicating makes such a big difference, then why do people not do it? Well, there's a number of reasons. The simplest would be, well, they don't want to get caught, right? They're in that state of mind where they're like, well, I still want to do this. But I'm more talking about those people who really do want to get better. Why do they still under-communicate what's happening? Here's a few possibilities. One of them is they don't want to be a burden on other people. Oh, everybody else already has their own problems. I don't want to burden people with my stuff. I guess I just have to do this on my own and hope I figure it out. Okay? Or it could be, I'm right on the edge of finding the magic bullet, the one thing that I need to do, that last remaining tool where I can solve this on my own, and I don't need other people, so why would I tell people what's going on? I'm right on the edge. I'm on the cusp of it. Another reason might be that they don't like that people are upset that they haven't figured it out yet. Okay? You're still struggling with pornography? Oh my gosh, what is wrong with you? There's that fear, like I don't want people to be upset with me, so I'm going to pretend like I have it figured out because then they're nicer to me. And the last one would be that, and this is for, especially as you're aging out of your parents' home, if you're a teenager, the older you get, closer to 17, 18, the more you want people kind of out of your business. You're trying to become autonomous, right? You're trying to make some of your own decisions. And so you don't want people to worry too much about you. If I over-communicate, mom's going to have a panic attack and ask me 8 billion questions, and I'll never be able to leave, right? That's the worry. And you're like, that's my life every Friday. Right? Or dad's going to grill me for 3 hours under a hot lamp kind of thing. So let me teach you a little trick. And this is great for the teens, by the way. I'm going to teach you how to get people off of your back. And that is answer all the questions before they ask them. This is magical. If you answer questions they didn't even know they had yet, they'll be like, I guess I can stop asking questions. This is fantastic. Your parents will think you are the greatest human on the face of the planet. Okay? And I guarantee you will get a lot more autonomy with decision making if you over-communicate. So, so important. Okay? So, and I'll tell you why. Here's the deal. Remember when I said our brains are designed, they're wired to do certain things. One of them is to be attuned into stories. The other one is to create patterns and fill in the blanks, right? If I were to draw a bunch of lines on a screen and say, take a look at this, the very first thing your brain would start to do is try to fill in the blanks and figure out what it is. What is this picture? What is this image? That we are designed to do that. That's what our brains do. So when you don't fill in the blanks, then everyone else around you is going to do it, and they will almost universally fill in the blanks with stuff that is less than exciting to you about you. It's always the worst case scenario. It's kind of like, how all parents know that the most terrifying sound in the world is silence when they have children, right? Like I can hear clanging metal and screaming and maybe even some explosions upstairs, and I'm like, sounds all right, But if I hear nothing, I'm like, what horrible thing is going on right now, right? I'm rushing up there. Like my kids could say, like if I go in there and I say to my kids, what are you guys doing? What's the worst thing that you could say to a parent? Nothing, right? It's like, no, nobody ever does nothing. Kids never do nothing. That means you're doing something wrong, guaranteed. And now I'm going to go in my head through all the possible wrong things you could be doing, okay? Like my kids could say to me, I could say, what are you guys doing? Oh, we're just preparing to sacrifice this goldfish to the Egyptian god Anubis. And I'd be like, all right. But if they say nothing, I'm like, all right, everybody sit down. Show me your hands. I want to know. Everybody's shoes off right now. What's going on? Okay? It is so when you say nothing, I'm fine. It's okay. I'm good. Nothing. Everyone has to. Their brains, by requirement, by biology, have to fill in the blanks. So don't let there be blanks. Over-communicate. Say more than you want to be saying so much about what's happening inside that people around you are like, can you stop? I don't need to know. Your stomach just growled. That's cool. Okay, that's fine. I don't need to know all this information, right? Thank you for sharing so much. So here's an example. We're on day 5. Our hero today is a married woman. She has a couple of kids. She's actually struggled with pornographic stories since her early 20s, so she'll go online and read these erotic stories. She's managed pretty well. She doesn't fall back into it very often, but every so often she gets just stressed. It's like, I just can't handle my life. I don't want to be here anymore. I want to be somewhere else, and I want to be somewhere else where I just don't have to deal with life. Okay? Her biggest risk factors are it's been emotionally a tough day. Her husband's emotionally absent, right? He's kind of unplugged. And then if she ends up alone at night, like everyone else falls asleep and she's alone, that's when her biggest risk factors are for her, okay? And she's aware of that. So today she's going to over-communicate to demonstrate what this looks like as far as helping her in her recovery, okay? So she wakes up, she can feel that nagging feeling because her husband, when she wakes up, he's already gone, okay? She's got places to go and whatnot. He didn't even try to wake her up, so she's already feeling isolated and alone and upset, like, why did he just take off, okay? So she's got that nagging feeling. And because she knows the risks, she calls her sister up. Her sister knows her history. And she says, hey, it's probably nothing, but I'm a little bit worried today. I'm feeling abandoned this morning. And I've got that feeling like, man, it would be so nice to just escape. Sister's very understanding and kind. They share some words. She says, hey, check in with me throughout the day. I just want to make sure you're okay. And she goes, yeah, if I run into any issues, I'll definitely call you back. So the day goes on. Her children are just grating on her nerves. They're just driving her nuts. She's really struggling with that, okay? And on her phone, she starts perusing these old web forums where she used to kind of read and chat with people, and people would post these stories on the forums. And she's on there, and she can feel all the chemicals coming back in from the old days. She calls her sister back. She says, hey, I feel bad calling you. I feel like I shouldn't be asking for help because I have this thing where I feel like my problems aren't important enough to ask for help, but you've promised me that it's okay, so I'm going to call you. And I'm back on the forum again. I know I said I wouldn't do it, but before I go anywhere else, before I put myself in danger, I need to talk about it. Sister's very grateful. They connect. Okay, she's feeling better. Okay. Now, later that evening, her husband comes home. Rather than stuffing her emotions and going, you know what, it's fine, I'll be okay, she opens up. She says, you know what, I feel like we're drifting apart. I'm upset about what happened this morning. Maybe you didn't even think anything of it, but for me it was very upsetting. Right? So she's communicating about everything that's going on with her instead of stuffing it. Okay? She's honest about where her mind has gone today. She's honest about the risks she's facing, and she asks him for some help. Now, things don't go perfectly with that conversation because it's real life. It's not always magical. But for today, she stays sober. In Alcoholics Anonymous, they often talk about hidden bottles. A hidden bottle is essentially alcohol that you hide away somewhere that you clearly don't need because you're now in recovery from alcohol, addiction or whatever, from alcoholism. But just in case you fall back into it, you need a quick access to some alcohol to grab onto. That's called a hidden bottle. And in sexual addiction or pornography addiction recovery, a hidden bottle would be that window, that access that you hang on to. You don't use it, but just in case you need it. Over-communicating destroys hidden bottles. Now we're going to come to increased distress tolerance. As I said, if you ask any recovering addict of any type, whether it's alcohol, gambling, drugs, whatever, you say, what's the biggest risk for relapse for you? You'll hear things like this. I can't handle conflict, or I get stressed when I have too much to do, or I just can't handle when people are upset at me, that kind of thing. Or I get angry and it just escalates into resentment and then it gets out of control. It is almost always about an emotional experience that cannot be tolerated. Now, there's a number of reasons this might be the case. Maybe some of it's genetics, right? Maybe you are biologically wired to not be able to tolerate emotion as well as other people. Okay, that's possible. It might be family of origin stuff. Maybe you grew up in a chronically distressed home and it was always, panic and chaos. And your body just can't tolerate it very well. But it also might be repetitively going back to pornography over and over again that creates this lack of distress tolerance. Okay? Because, think about this. If you're 14 and the main way that you cope with painful emotions is to numb out with pornography, and you just keep doing that repetitively and you never learn any other coping skills, then even by the time you're an adult, when things get ugly and when things get painful, you're kind of still emotionally 14. You never got out of that phase. So that requires a lot of emotional education, practice, etc. But I'm going to tell you what has been shown in research to be one of the most effective ways of increasing people's tolerance for emotional distress. And this, by the way, will work with anybody, okay? If you're the kind of person like your spouse gets mad at you or your parents are upset and you melt, then this is for you. This is a big deal. And by the way, this has been around for thousands of years, but here in the Western part of the world, we're just now figuring it out. And it's called mindfulness, okay? It's an Eastern practice. It's essentially non-judgmental self-awareness, okay? And we don't have time to go into depth in this, but you can Google mindfulness and look it up, and there's been a ton written and said about it. But mindfulness would sound something like this. I'm noticing right now that I'm feeling anxious. My body feels tense. My muscles are tight. My hands are shaking a little. I must be worried about something. Good news, I'm not actually dying. I say that to my kids all the time. They're crying about something, right? And I'm empathic with my kids, but I will, to help them calm down, I'll go, are you dying? No. Great. Now we can go from there. This is fantastic. You may notice I'm not panicking because you're not dying, okay? It's really helpful, and it helps. It's fun for me. So, so then you might say, I'm not dying, but I'm just going to sit here for a moment. I'm going to breathe. I'm going to just notice my breath. I'm going to notice my emotions, and I know that all emotion is temporary. There is no such thing as a permanent emotion. So no matter what I'm feeling right now, it will pass at some point. And there are all kinds of fun visualizations you can do. You can imagine lying down and watching the clouds pass, and that's your emotion. You can imagine being on a wave, and as it crests, it's the most painful part of the emotion, and it comes down and the emotion subsides. However works for you, you can sit through an emotion, okay? And so you can say, I can just sit here and be for a moment. I don't have to solve my anxiety. It will begin to pass. Now, some of you cannot imagine being able to do that. It seems basically outside of your core skill set. Mindfulness practices are the key, says research, to be able to actually do that. Okay? So here we are. It's day 6. Our hero is another married guy. No, it's another married woman, sorry. She uses sexual fantasy to cope with emotional pain. Sometimes she turns to pornography. Hardly anyone knows, and that's where she needs to make some shifts here, okay? Because women tend to be more ashamed of their own behaviors than men when it comes to pornography. So women are getting less help than men. They're still having problems, but they're getting less help because there's a high level of shame among women, okay? They're much more ashamed of their behaviors. So that's a change that has to happen. When she feels disconnected from people in her life, she's more likely to slip into fantasy. She's on her way to school this morning. She and her husband are they're young married. They're both in school. Her husband and her have a fight about finances. They're out the door. He says something rude before she goes. She tries to focus on school for the day, but she just can't get these sexual fantasy images. They keep coming in, trying to break into her brain, okay? When she gets home, she has about an hour before her husband gets home, and she knows that if she keeps sitting this and white-knuckling and trying to hold on for dear life, she's eventually going to fall back in. So she clears space in her living room. She sits down. She focuses on her breathing. She just is for a moment, okay? She notices her emotions. She's grateful that her emotions tell her information. In fact, she decides that her emotion is telling her that she needs to be able to stand up for herself in her marriage, and she hasn't been doing it the way that she wants to. So she promises herself she's going to confront her husband when he gets home about the fact that she doesn't like the way things are going in their conflict conversations. She pays attention to all that. And within 15 minutes, those emotions subside, and she's able to spend 45 minutes doing something she really enjoys instead of just trying to hang on for dear life. She stays sober for the day. Our last one is be patient. Patience is one of those character traits that's the most hard to obtain. It's the most difficult because you almost have to stop caring about it in order to get it, right? The harder you try to be patient, the more annoyed you get. Why isn't it hurrying up and getting over here, right? So it's a real challenge, okay? Rome wasn't built in a day. Recovery isn't built overnight. You know, you're here. Some of you are really hoping you're going to get all the tools and go home and implement them and fix the problem today. But the truth is that whether you're the one struggling with the pornography or whether you're the one watching someone struggle and it's torturing you, you all get the wonderful opportunity to practice patience, okay? Because you know what? Just like Gandalf said, you know, a wizard arrives precisely when he means to, right? Solutions to problems tend to happen about when they do. And we don't have a ton of control over forcing them to go faster. We can slow them down, for sure, by panicking, freaking out, trying to control everything in the world. But as we surrender and let go, I'm not saying do nothing. This isn't about like practicing active hopelessness. This is about practicing surrender. That is, I'm only going to focus on things I have some level of influence over, and everything else I have to just let go of, including the time frame for getting better. As you do that, you will begin to manage so much better those emotions. So on day 7, we're back to our 17-year-old girl. She, not only does she struggle with isolation, but she struggles with perfectionism. Today, she has to actively, out loud, remind herself, I'm not perfect, and that's okay. No one is perfect. In fact, those people who seem perfect might be the sickest people out there because they have practiced looking perfect, which is the most dangerous human on the planet, okay? And because she's able to be patient with herself, then she's capable of being sober for today because she is not getting worked up about it. And the truth is that no matter whether your recovery comes now or in time, my experience with clients is it does tend to come for those who are actively seeking it. There's no genuine guarantees of anything, but these 7 principles are the ones that I found to be some of the very most helpful for my therapy clients, and I hope they help you in your lives. Thank you very much.